You know that feeling. You have a friend who keeps making the same mistake over and over again. You sit them down. You explain, carefully and patiently, exactly what the problem is and exactly what they should do differently. They nod. They say, yeah, I get it. And then they go and do the exact same thing again. You try again. Same result. You try a third time. Nothing. It's like talking to a wall. No, it's worse than talking to a wall. At least a wall doesn't nod and pretend to listen. Koreans have a perfect expression for this moment. Maeidongpung. Maeidongpung. 4 characters. And they describe this situation so perfectly that once you learn them, you will see this phrase everywhere because what it describes happens everywhere, to everyone, in every culture on earth. Welcome back to K-Wisdom, where 4 characters hold thousands of years of Korean wisdom. Today, Maeidongpung. Let's find out what it means. Let's break down the 4 characters one by one. Ma, horse. I, ear. Dong, east. Pung, wind. Put it together, Maeidongpung, the east wind on a horse's ear. Now before you say anything, yes, there is a horse in this one. An actual horse. With actual ears. No confusion this time. So what does it mean when you say the east wind passes a horse's ear? Think about it. A horse is standing in a field. The wind blows. The east wind rushes right past the horse's ears. And the horse? Doesn't react at all. Doesn't turn its head. Doesn't flick its ears. Doesn't register that anything has happened. The wind came. The wind went. And the horse feels absolutely nothing. Maeidongpung means treating someone's words, advice, or criticism the way a horse treats the east wind. In one ear and out the other. Without registering. Without caring. Without changing anything at all. In everyday Korean, Maeidongpung is used to describe someone who completely ignores advice, criticism, or warnings no matter how important, how well-meaning, or how many times they are repeated. It's not just being stubborn. It's not just disagreeing. Maeidongpung describes a total failure to even register what is being said, as if the words never arrived at all. In English, there is a similar saying, in one ear and out the other. But Maeidongpung is more vivid, more specific, because it doesn't just say the words passed through. It says they passed through like wind on a horse's ear, completely unfelt. Completely unregistered, leaving no trace at all. In Korean, there is also a very similar expression, sogwi jeongilji, reading Buddhist scriptures to a cow's ear. The image is almost identical, wisdom being delivered to an animal that cannot appreciate or understand it. Both expressions capture the same frustration. The same exhausted feeling of speaking carefully and thoughtfully to someone who absorbs absolutely nothing. But Maeidongpung comes from a very specific story. A story about one of the greatest poets who ever lived and the pain of feeling completely misunderstood. To understand where Maeidongpung comes from, we need to travel back over 1,000 years to Tang Dynasty, China, around the 8th century AD. And we need to meet one of the most celebrated poets in all of Chinese history. His name was Li Bai. Ibag in Korean. Li Bai was a genius. His poetry was dazzling, full of imagery, emotion, and a kind of raw honesty that made people feel deeply seen. He wrote about friendship, nature, loneliness, and the fleeting beauty of life. He was also, by many accounts, a man who felt profoundly misunderstood by the world around him. Despite his brilliance, Li Bai struggled his entire life to be truly heard. He shared his ideas with powerful men who ignored him. He offered wisdom to people who dismissed it. He poured his heart into his writing and felt, again and again, that his words simply bounced off the people around him. No matter how beautifully he expressed himself. No matter how clearly he explained his thinking. No matter how many times he tried. The words arrived, and nothing changed, and so he wrote a poem. In the poem, Li Bai expressed his deep frustration at the world's inability or unwillingness to understand him. He felt that no matter what he said, no matter how clearly he spoke, his words simply passed by the people around him without leaving any mark. And in that poem, he used an image that would outlast him by more than 1,000 years. He compared the indifference of the world to the east wind passing a horse's ear. Maeidongpung, the wind blows. The horse feels nothing. That image, the east wind on a horse's ear, captured something so universal, so instantly recognizable, that it spread far beyond Li Bai's original poem. It traveled across centuries, across borders, from Tang Dynasty China into Korean language and culture, where it became one of the most commonly used 4-character idioms in everyday speech. Because the feeling Li Bai described, the exhaustion of speaking to someone who simply will not hear you, is not unique to any one time or place. It is one of the oldest frustrations in human experience. And that is why Maeidongpung is still used constantly in modern Korean, because the situation it describes is everywhere. The parent who gives the same warning to their teenager every single morning and the teenager who has never, not once, actually listened. The doctor who explains clearly why a patient needs to change their habits and the patient who nods politely and changes nothing. The teacher who explains a concept 5 different ways and the student who stares blankly and asks the same question again the next day. Maeidongpung. The words arrive. Nothing changes. The wind passes the horse's ear and disappears into the air. But here is something interesting worth thinking about. Why do people have Maeidongpung moments? Sometimes it is arrogance, a belief that you already know everything worth knowing, and therefore nothing anyone says can teach you anything new. Sometimes it is defensiveness, the words feel threatening, so the mind shuts them out before they can land. Sometimes it is simply distraction, the person is so caught up in their own world that there is genuinely no space for anything from outside to come in. And sometimes, and this is the uncomfortable one, the person receiving the advice is not entirely wrong to ignore it. Not all advice is good. Not all criticism is fair. This is what makes Maeidongpung such an interesting and layered expression. On the surface, it seems to only describe the listener, the person who refuses to hear. And yes, sometimes that is exactly what it is. Pure stubbornness. Pure closed-mindedness. But Li Bai's original poem was not about judging others for not listening. It was about his own pain, the pain of feeling unheard. Of speaking from the heart and having your words dissolve into air. Which means Maeidongpung can describe 2 different experiences: the frustration of the person who speaks and is ignored, and the perception of the person who feels their words are being treated like wind. Sometimes the horse is the problem. And sometimes the wind just isn't reaching the right ears yet. There is something quietly poetic about the fact that Li Bai, the man who felt so profoundly ignored, whose words he feared dissolved like wind, became one of the most widely read poets in all of East Asian history. His words did not dissolve. They outlasted him by over 1,000 years. They crossed borders. They became part of the everyday language of millions of people who never knew his name but use his image every single day. The man who felt like no one was listening turned out to be one of the most listened to voices in history. Maeidongpung itself is proof of that. So how do Koreans actually use Maeidongpung in everyday life? You might hear a parent say, "I've told that child to study 100 times. Maeidongpungia, total waste of breath." A friend might say, "I tried to warn him about that job. But you know him, Maeidongpung, he never listens." Or someone might describe their own experience, "I kept telling my boss the plan had problems. Maeidongpungia asio, nobody heard me." 4 characters, used in a sentence. And everyone who hears it immediately knows exactly the feeling being described because they have felt it too. And here is the question that Maeidongpung quietly asks all of us. Not who in your life has Maeidongpung, but when are you the horse? Because the truth is, most of us have been the horse at some point. Most of us have had someone try to tell us something important and we nodded, and smiled, and then went and did exactly what we were going to do anyway. Sometimes that was the right choice. Sometimes the advice wasn't good. But sometimes, and this is worth sitting with, the wind was carrying something real. Something we needed, and we let it pass right through without feeling it at all. The opposite of Maeidongpung is not simply agreeing with everything you hear. The opposite of Maeidongpung is genuine listening. Not waiting for your turn to speak. Not already formulating your response while the other person is still talking. Not filtering everything through, "Do I agree or disagree?" before the sentence is even finished. But actually opening up enough to let the words land. To sit with them. To ask, is there something here worth hearing, even if it's uncomfortable? Even if it challenges what I already believe. That kind of listening is rare. And that is exactly why Maeidongpung, the failure of it, has its own 4-character idiom that has lasted 1,000 years. Li Bai spent much of his life feeling like the wind, beautiful and moving, but unable to leave any impression on the ears it passed. He never knew that his words would outlast dynasties. That a single image from a single poem would become part of the living language of a country he may never have visited. That the very thing he wrote to express his pain at being unheard would be heard and remembered for over 1,000 years. There is something deeply comforting about that, if you think about it. The wind that feels like it's passing through unnoticed sometimes plants seeds that grow much later, in places and hearts you never expected. So the next time someone accuses you of Maeidongpung, of treating their words like wind on a horse's ear, it might be worth pausing for a moment. Not to immediately agree, not to feel guilty, but just to ask, is there something in this wind worth feeling? And the next time you feel like your words are dissolving into air, like no one is really hearing you, remember Li Bai. The man who felt most unheard left the most enduring words. Sometimes speaking clearly and honestly, even into apparent indifference, is worth doing anyway. Because you never know which ears your wind will eventually reach. That is Maeidongpung, the east wind on a horse's ear. Born from the pain of a poet who felt unheard. Used every day by millions of people who have felt the same frustration or caused it or both. 4 characters that ask 2 questions at once. Who in your life treats your words like wind on a horse's ear? And when are you the horse? Tell us in the comments. Because Maeidongpung moments happen to everyone, everywhere, in every language. And sharing them well, at least someone will listen. Thank you for watching K-Wisdom, where 4 characters hold thousands of years of Korean wisdom. If this stayed with you, please like and subscribe. There are many more 4 characters waiting. See you next time on K-Wisdom.